My pranams to Swami Gnanananda ji, though I never had the privilege of having a darshan. I think that Swami Hariprasad ji is a living embodiment of her grace. So I'm very blessed to have met him and have received his, invitation for this conference. It's very humbling indeed to be amongst such stalwarts. I want to convey my respects to Professor Bhatt, Professor Sinha, who are probably not here with us, Professor C.T. Indraji, Dr. Bhagesh Jha Sahab, many eminent people, and Mahesh ji, who has been helping in this event right from the beginning. Thank you, Swamiji, for inviting me to this conference. I think that it has given me an opportunity to think about some of these topics, especially what constitutes Krishnanubhava, as you said. And I think one of the most interesting things to reflect on, to think on, to meditate upon is, what does it mean when Swami Gnanananda ji said, the smaller the Krishna, the greater the power? I think this is something that we should, think about very deeply. Let me tell you, offhand what the topic of my talk is going to be. It's called Balakrishna and Miraculous Grace, the History and Politics of Vatsalya Bhakti. So before I start talking about this topic, I want to once again thank Swamiji, because it's only because I was invited to this conference that I started reading the Harivamsha, especially the crucial chapters which concern the stories of Balakrishna. These are chapters, I think they are chapters 47 to 78, if I'm not mistaken, because I was not familiar with this text, and it's only when I was invited to this conference I started reading about it. And I'll tell you why this is important, because we've heard several aspects of the topic so far. We've heard certain metaphysical points that were made by Professor Bhatt. We heard some axiological observations by Professor Sinha. We read a text with Professor Shrikala Nair, who also wrote the theme note, the Bilava Mangalam text she read for us, almost gave us a commentary on it. But there are certain aspects of this, should I say, phenomenon of Balakrishna we haven't touched upon at all. And I would say that these are the historical, critical aspects on the one hand, and the political aspects. And when I was reflecting on how to organize this talk, I thought about the metaphor of the Tribhanga, which is a very important posture, not only when we think about Krishna, but also many other deities. In fact, Shiva is also depicted in Tribhanga. So you have this body, which is really the cosmological body of the Akhanda Purusha, but it's bent in three places, Below the knees, it's in one direction, knees to the waist in another direction, and above the waist, it's in a third direction. So I look at these as metaphors of what I want to say, that there is a spiritual dimension to this topic, but there's also a historical and political dimension. Okay, so it's like they're looking in three different ways, almost as if in Tribhanga, but ultimately it's the oneness of that Akhanda Purusha, the magnificent Purusha that we come across in the Purusha Sukta, which is once again depicted, even though in the Manushya Leela, and in this case, the Leela of childhood. And I was also reminded of the three aspects of the Bharatiya Parampara, as was explained to me by Professor K.J. Shah, a great teacher of philosophy who worked with Wittgenstein. But we see it in all our granthas. And these three are Anubhav, Vichar, and Achar. And I think the Indian tradition is so inventive, and it is self-renewing, because it is able to, in some ways, cohere or join these three aspects, the anubhav and then the vichara, because without the articulation of the anubhav, it remains mystical, noetic, as William James so well put it in Varieties of Religious Experience. And finally, in achar, that is in your conduct, if you cannot carry it out, then there's a great schism, which is actually the characteristic of modernity. In fact and value, in one's inner life and one's conduct, there's no cohesion, etc. And in a way, you can define modernity in that manner. But with these observations, I want to refer to all these three aspects. The aspect of the anubhava of Balakrishna, the historical critical method to try to understand Balakrishna, and finally the political significance of this phenomenon that we are talking about. Now, the historical critical method is what we have learned from the West, the historical, critical, and philological method. And some say that we must throw it out of the window because it's a colonial imposition. That I can't get into that debate just now. There's a wonderful book on it by Vishwa Adluri and Joydeep Bakchi called The Nay Science, where they go into German Indology and its foundational principles. For me, Sri Aurobindo is a great model in Secret of the Veda. He does not throw this method overboard, the historical critical method, which is very important, which is very necessary, because if you want to understand any phenomenon in India, you can't throw that method completely overboard. And yet, if you confine yourself only to the historical critical method, what happens to spiritual experience? What happens to metaphysical issues? What happens to the deeper symbolism? And so you have in Sri Aurobindo a model where he has the Nirukta, Vyaska, and then he has the commentary of Sayana. He includes the philology and the anthropology of Max Muller and others, and then comes up with his own interpretation, which is quite unique. So we can learn a lot from Sri Aurobindo in terms of how to ground our own hermeneutics in today's time. So taking a leaf out of his book, I wanted to refer to this question of Balakrishna because this posed a very interesting problem to the early Indologists, because they said, how did the Krishna of the Mahabharata, which they dated prior to the Bhagavad Puran and the Harivamsha, the Krishna of the Bhagavad Gita, how did he suddenly become Balakrishna, whose sports and leelas are worshipped and celebrated all over India? So this was a conundrum that occupied them. And some said that this was a revolution in Krishna Bhakti, in Bhagavata Dharma, which became in a way the great dharma of at least North India, but as I shall argue later when I talk about the politics of Balakrishna, it was a great uniting factor between North India and South India. We already heard about this from Swamiji earlier, that the Alawars celebrated Balakrishna and his leelas as much as the poets of North India. In fact, long before them, long before Surdas, you have an evidence of the celebration of Krishna Bhakti in the form of a little child in the South. So it's a great uniting, so to speak, religion. But when you look at it from the historical, critical, philological point of view, it seems that the Krishna of the Bhagavad Gita and of the Mahabharata antedates the Krishna of the Bhagavad Purana and the Harivansha. After all, the Harivansha is considered to be the appendix of the Mahabharata. It's a Khila volume, and it's a very long book, about 23,000 verses, I'm told. And that is where, for the first time in chapters 47 to 78, you get the reference to Balakrishna, okay? And I read those chapters thanks to the invitation to this conference. And then these chapters are elaborated in the Bhagavad Puran with further additions. But what we see in the Harivansha is not denied. It's not annulled, it's not abrogated, but much more is added. Anyhow, so the early thinkers on this topic, 1908, there was a Indologist called Kennedy, and he gave the theory that this is because of Christianity. See, Christianity celebrates the baby Jesus, and Jesus and Madonna become, the standard objects of worship, certainly in the Roman Catholic world. And, you take an icon like this of Balakrishna with Yashoda, it really reminds you of the picture of the Madonna and Jesus, isn't it? And so there was a theory that the worship of the baby Krishna came to India from the Middle East, and the people who brought it were the Gujars, the tribes who emigrated, and the Abhiras. Okay, and this theory went on for some time until Keith himself repudiated it, and there were other repudiations which were more authentic, because you know that the story of Krishna is referred to not only in Patanjali's Mahabhashya, which comes before the birth of Jesus, but also in Panini. And there is evidence in Mahabharata as well, in the Shishupala Vadha chapter, where Shishupala mocks Krishna, and I have the passage somewhere, let me see if I can find it, where he is mocked. Shishupala mocks him he says that, is this why, you magician, you trickster, is this why you have been considered an avatar? On the basis of such flimsy evidence, you killed a bird called Putana, you lifted up an ant hill, and you called it Govardhan, and you killed a horse, Keshi, and an elephant. So this mocking reference is found in the Mahabharata, although those verses are disputed. It's not possibly in the Suktankar critical edition of the Mahabharata, doesn't possibly have this reference. But the whole point that is being made is that the worship of Krishna as a child antedates or goes long before the birth of Jesus. So thinking that Christianity is the source. And this work was done by Charlotte Vaudeville at Sorbonne. She unearthed many stories of what she called a pre-Aryan godling, and the story of the slaying of Kamsa and so forth, and many cycles. Anyhow, this is the reference in the Mahabharata 2:38, 4-9, when Shishupal is heaping insults on his enemy Krishna, impugning that his Kshatriya status is to be doubted, because his claim to kingly fame rests on upsetting a cart, slaying a female bird called Putana, eating a lot of food, lifting up an anthill, and making a mountain of a molehill, so to speak, and killing a horse and a bull, Keshi and Arishta. Anyhow, so the historical critical method does, throw up this question: how do you account for the rise of the worship of Krishna and his frolic suddenly? And there's an answer given by Norvin Hine, who taught at Yale University. He was at the Divinity School, but he's written a definitive book called The Miracle Plays of Mathura. He stayed in the Braj Bhumi and did a lot of work, and has written some amazing essays on this topic. And one that I read and I found very useful, I'll recommend. It's called A Revolution in Krishnaism, the Cult of Gopala. So anyhow, he has his fascinating theory, and I'll explain the theory only in 1 minute. He says basically that Krishna, Bhagavad Dharma became the state religion of the Guptas, because the Mauryas, the last of the Mauryas, became Buddhist, and the theory is that the so-called Brahmanism was reinstated by the Guptas, and they used Bhagavad Dharma and universalize the worship of Vishnu, and his avatars. Now, that's when I'm now going to segue to the political. But according to Norman Hine, he said that this was institutionalized, and then he gives a, slightly anthropological, psychoanalytic reading of why Balakrishna is worshipped. He says basically Varnashram Dharma creates a very restricted society. So you need an outlet, and the outlet is in the frolics of a child who is above the laws of society. The child can do anything he or she wishes. And so you have an outlet. And then he gives the example of the modern ISKCON, where they're extremely strict, almost puritanical in their dress, in their observations, in what they eat, and even in their sexual conduct. But the texts are about the leelas of Krishna, including his so-called adulterous passion. So that's his theory. We may or may not agree with him. In fact, personally, I don't agree with him, but I find it interesting, and I don't want to dismiss these speculations, because even if you regard Krishna as Professor Bhatt said, he is nothing but the embodiment of Satchitanand, Brahman, Purna, Param Brahman, or the Godhead. Even so, the question remains, why did we transit from the Vedic form of worship, to other forms of worship? And today, though all forms of worship usually want to legitimate themselves through the Vedas, they don't follow. I mean, nobody knows the Vedas today, hardly anybody does. But the worship of Krishna is still so popular, right? So certainly, though much of classical India was ahistorical, I don't think we can afford to ignore history altogether. We'll have to find, that's why I use the Tribhanga as a metaphor, that each one of these is pointing in a different direction, but we must reconcile them. And this is a challenge of being modern Indians, because we can talk about this later, we may not have the time to do that today, but we cannot ignore these questions that have been raised. And I have my own theory, which I'm going to talk about in the context of something that is an extremely, should I say, topical controversy. And I'm going to refer you to another book. And this book is a very important book. It's by Meenakshi Jain. It's called Vasudeva Krishna and Mathura. And it's a follow-up on a book on the flight of the gods. And in this book, of course, she also has put together all the archaeological evidence of images of Krishna and stories of Krishna. Again, some of them are very old. They go back to, 200 in the Common Era. And so the dating is also very interesting. So basically, she says that Krishna has been continuously worshipped in India for about 2,000 years. And the center of one of the main centers of worship of Krishna was the region that we call Mathura today. And the book, as I said, is very topical because it talks about the Katara Keshava Deva, which refers to the Krishna Janmabhoomi, which is under litigation even as we speak. The matter is in the courts. Should the Krishna Janmabhoomi be restored, to those who want to worship Balakrishna? So this is what I called in my topic. I refer you back to the title of my essay, Balakrishna and Miraculous Grace, the History and Politics of Vatsalya Bhakti. So in response to the question, why did Bhagavad Dharma become the state religion? My theory is that it is the avatars of Vishnu which give us an opportunity, because we refer to the verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Yada Yada Dharmasya Glanir Bhavati Bharata, the reappearance of the Lord to protect his devotees. And I refer you to the quotation or the comment that Swamiji made at the beginning in his benedictory address. After the slaying of Kalia, the folks, the simple Gopas of Rajbhumi are enthralled, awestruck, full of adbhuta rasa at the feats, at these feats of their own familiar friend and fellow cowherd. And they say, who are you? And he says to them, all of you think that I am terrible in valor. That is not how you should think of me. I am your kith and relative. However, if you really wish to hear the truth, wait for an appropriate time. So wait for an appropriate time. It is then that you will be able to hear about me and see my true nature. If you now take pride in your relative being like a god in his radiance, you have shown me your favors. What is the need to know anything more? In other words, the Lord in his form as Vishnu reappearing again and again when we are under threat, whether the threat is ecological, when part of the Yamuna, the pond, becomes poisonous because of Kalia, whether it is because of inclement weather, or the wrath of Indra, who then surrenders and bows to Krishna in the Harivamsha and says, a portion of mine will be born as Arjuna, your companion, and you'll have to defeat these Kauravas and so forth. So whether it is a natural calamity, whether it is nuclear or radioactive waste, or whether it is a series of invasions, the Lord has promised that he will be here to protect us in his different avatars. And that is why Bhagavat Dharma becomes the state religion in North India. And if you look at the history of medieval India, where we succumbed to invasion after invasion, the Lord as Rama came back to protect us. The Lord as Krishna came back to protect us. And the restoration of the sites which are sacred to our civilization and predate the idea of secular India, the restoration of these sites is a matter of great importance if you want this culture to reunite and not have a schizophrenic existence, to reunite with its ancient past without denying its immediate and post-independence present, okay? So we have to, this is like your Tribhanga, the ancient past, the medieval times, as well as British colonialism and present India have all to be combined if we have to have a self-realization or self-recognition and to understand for this civilization to manifest itself in its full potency. And so it is the same Vishnu who reincarnates or appears as possibly as Guru Gobind Singh or Swami, of Ramakrishna Paramhamsa to fight British imperialism, materialism, and the destruction. A whole civilization in Kali Yuga going towards Kamini Kanchana. So it is the Bhagavad Dharma in its various forms where the Lord has promised that he will reincarnate again and again to save his flock. And this gives us a message of hope that the Lord is our friend, as in the Bhagavad Gita, not somebody as we were told by Professor Bhatt, he's both transcendent and immanent. The presence of Krishna in our midst, when we need him, when we call on to him, was a source of great hope. When Vrindavan was made right between Agra and Delhi, the two imperial capitals, when there was not a single standing temple in North India, what a miracle of grace that was, and also a miracle of great diplomacy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So these are things we have not been able to understand with our purely secular blinkers, that there was something miraculous. And this is where we come back to the idea that the smaller the Krishna, the greater the power to energize us and to show us something. And why is this worship of Krishna so unique? because Krishna is a greatly transgressive deity. In Madhurya Bhav, his paramour and partner is Radha, not Rukmini. Though in Maharashtra we worship Rukmini and Vitthal. So these are very fascinating aspects. Even in his Balakrishna form, it's not his real birth mother Devaki, but his foster mother Yashoda. And what about the dual avatar? Sankarshana is not really related to him because Yashoda, so they're not even brothers in that sense, okay? So the brothers are not brothers, the mother is not a mother, the Shakti, the wife, is not a wife, and yet Krishna belongs to them more than everybody else. So it's a great story. I mean, we heard earlier how Indian narratives contain the highest philosophy. So the story of Krishna is a continuous invitation to us to decode this mystery of the Lord and how he or she keeps coming back to us and wants to make, I mean, you read the Harivansha, and Indra says, henceforth, earth will be like heaven. And this is what we want to do. We call it Ram Raja, or we may call it Vrindavan, we may call it Vaikuntha, or we may call it the divine life on earth, if you want to go back to Sri Aurobindo. What we want to do is we want to perfect this earthly life by completely spiritualizing it and transforming it. And this is what Krishna helps us to do in his easiest, the most sulabh form. Because look at Vatsalya Bhakti, how easy it is for every mother or father to regard the Lord as their child. You know, and this is what we saw in the story of Yashoda's Vishwarupa in the mouth of baby Krishna. If every mother can see the Lord, I mean, the omnipotent, omnipresent, and infinite Parabrahman itself as their own child, how much easier it is to relate, you know, to the majesty of God and to love God so easily. Love comes so naturally in that form. So this invention of Vatsalya Bhakti was nothing short of revolutionary, because Madhurya Bhakti is very difficult to find. You know, in our normal earthly life, you find it's hard to get a perfect partner. It's even hard to make a marriage succeed. So Madhurya Bhakti is so difficult. But Vatsalya Bhakti, I mean, which father or mother doesn't have a natural affection or child or love for their own offspring? So this is a great revolution. And remember, if the Lord is your child, you have to protect the Lord. And so you need Ram Lalla's birthplace to be restored. You need, you know, Balakrishna, Balagopal's birthplace to be restored. And use constitutional means, use legal means, use every means at hand to get back that deep connection. Because what we see in this book is they destroyed it, we rebuilt it. And this is the eternal cycle of Sanatana Dharma. You destroy it 1,000,000 times, it'll be rebuilt 1,000,001 times. And that is why the smaller the Krishna, the greater the power of Krishna. So let me now end with the most delicate, the most sensitive part of my talk. And I'm not even sure I should mention it. I take Swamiji's permission, because I was told by some of my teachers that if you have a spiritual experience, you should never talk about it, because you dilute it and you throw it away like pearls, etc. But there are no, I won't complete that parable, because there are no creatures of that sort in our presence today. But, you know, I must go back to that marvelous experience that happened to a certain version of the speaker. I won't even say it was me. And it was a time, you know, when I was about maybe, or that person was around 10 years old. He had had his Upanayanam, and he was given the task of doing the puja at home. And one day, the family had a guest. And she was, an unmarried lady who only wore white. And, people warned this child that, she's very strange, be careful. Wherever she goes, she carries this Balakrishna, and she can't be parted with this baby Krishna. And we have it in our shrine room. All of us have that image when we do worship. I can't think of any home where you don't have that image of Balakrishna. And so this lady was there, and this child was very drawn to her, and she was very affectionate to this child. And the conversation went that she had this wish to go to Vrindavan Gardens in Mysore. So the family was living in Bangalore at that time. The child's father said, yeah, we'll arrange this trip for you, no worries. And she said, no, but I can't go. I can't go because I have to feed this Balakrishna, the baby Krishna depends on me. And I can't leave this baby Krishna, and I can't take him with me because there are some rituals I have to do. So when I'm traveling, I have to eat certain kinds of food. So when she came and became our guest, I remember, with due respect, to other members of my family, they complained, now she's going to take over the kitchen. She'll have to make her own food. She won't eat what we eat, this, that, and everything. Anyhow, the long and short of it is that she said that I will go, provided someone does the proper puja for my Balakrishna. So they said, oh, we can get somebody to come for you. We can get the family priest can come. And then she said, who's doing the puja now? So somebody pointed to that child. He says, he's doing the puja. And they said, oh, he's very stupid. He argues with everyone. He doesn't believe in anything, but they ask him to do it. So he does this, But he does it, he bathes the deities. He does the chandan, and he puts the, he offers the flowers and all that. He puts the tilak and the kumkum. He does it. Doesn't believe, and he rings the bell and he gives prasad to everyone. That he does, but he's very foolish. He doesn't know anything. So she called me and she said, look, please take this seriously. I'm going to go away for just 2 days because it's an overnight trip. And so please do this properly. Or maybe it was just 1 day. So he promises that he'll do it. And she goes in the car to Mysore. It's a 4-5 hour journey. She's staying there that night and returning the next morning. So the next morning, the child, has to do the puja. And as luck has it, he's a bit careless. And then something happens. And then they said, oh, why are you late? It's 7:30. Go and do your puja. Go take a bath. Do your, whatever your rituals are. And do. So he does it. And then when he's doing this, he finds when he's offering, the dhoop and the deepam and the flowers and the prasad, this little baby Krishna moves. The Krishna is moving when he offers, as if to take the offerings. And then, first time it happens, he can't believe it. And he blinks and he says, well, I do this every day because there's a Krishna in his own shrine which never moved, which never did anything. But this lady's baby Krishna has come forward, as it were, to take the offering. So he calls his mother, he calls his aunt. There are other visitors in the house. And he says, look, can't you see this little baby Krishna is moving? So they said, okay, let's do it. So he does the thing and he offers, and it moves, and nobody else can see this Krishna moving. Anyhow, the worship is over. Then this lady comes back, and the next morning, he goes to her and says, you must be a magician. So she said, look, what happened? So he said that, all these days I'm doing the puja, nothing happened, but your baby Krishna that little baby Krishna is alive. He moved. When I made the offering, he moved. And she just put her mouth, her fingers, her mouth, her hands over my mouth, and she started weeping. And she said, people think I'm crazy, but this is the Krishna who has shown himself to me. And obviously I can't have a normal life. I can't be like anybody else. And no one understands my life, and they think I'm a crazy person. And then I said to her, I said, how is it that I saw it and nobody else could see it? So she said, well, your mind is not yet corrupted. That's why you could see it. And after some time, you won't be able to see him, but maybe later he may come back to you. So I think that all of our traditions are based on anubhav, vichar, and achar. And I feel very blessed to be a part of this conference and very humbled because I had absolutely no knowledge of Balakrishna, in any academic sense, but because Swamiji offered, or rather ordered me to speak here, I started thinking about this, and then I recollected some of these, I think for me, very special experiences, and also read the Harivansha portions of it, and could relate it to our present context where the recovery and revitalization of our civilization is an ongoing task for all of us. And it doesn't exclude anybody, because the greatest devotees of Krishna included Muslims, such as Ras Khan. There's a whole tradition of Krishna devotees who were not even Hindu. So Krishna belongs to everyone, and certainly Balakrishna belongs to all of those of us who have been privileged to be parents. And this is the form of worship which is suitable to Kali Yuga as well. And so with these words, I once again offer my pranams and gratitude. And I hope that the series called Krishna Anubhava takes us onward to this great recovery of our civilization, which is what the purpose of Mahavishnu as the protector of Sanatan Dharma reminds us is our duty as present-day Arjunas. Thank you so much. Thank you.